What would you do if you had to choose between your next meal and helping a complete stranger? Most of us like to think we'd do the right thing. But when push comes to shove, when survival is on the line, our true character gets tested in ways we never expect. Tonight, I want to tell you about Maya, a young woman who made a choice that would change two lives forever, though she had no way of knowing it at the time. Picture this. It's one of those brutal winter nights where the cold doesn't just bite, it devours. Maya's walking home from her second job, clutching her last $20, money she'd been saving for tomorrow's lunch. Her stomach's been growling for hours, but she's learned to ignore hunger. It's just another part of her reality. That's when she sees him, huddled on a park bench like a forgotten shadow. There's a man who seems to be losing his battle against the merciless cold. Now here's where most people would feel that familiar tug of sympathy, maybe even reach for their wallet, but then find a dozen excuses to keep walking. He might spend it on drugs. I've got my own problems. Someone else will help him. But Maya doesn't think twice. What she doesn't know is that this moment of pure, unscripted kindness is about to expose one of the most powerful men in the city for who he really is, because the shivering stranger on that bench isn't what he appears to be. He's conducting what he calls a humanity test, and Maya just passed in ways that will shake him to his core. But here's the thing about tests: sometimes the person giving them learns more than the person taking them, and sometimes an act of kindness becomes the beginning of a love story that challenges everything. Two people thought they knew about wealth, worth, and what really matters in this world. This is a story about what happens when genuine compassion collides with calculated power, when a moment of vulnerability reveals the truth about who we really are, and when the last dime in your pocket becomes the first step toward a future you never could have imagined. So grab something warm to drink, get comfortable, and let me tell you about the night Maya gave everything she had to a stranger, and discovered that sometimes the universe has a way of rewarding kindness in the most unexpected ways imaginable. Picture this. It's one of those brutal winter nights where the cold doesn't just bite, it devours everything in its path. The kind of night where most people hurry past with their heads down, breath visible in quick puffs, desperate to reach the warmth of their homes. The city streets were practically empty except for the occasional car splashing through puddles of slush, their headlights cutting through the darkness like desperate prayers for warmth. But Maya wasn't like most people. She was walking through the city's downtown area, her worn jacket barely keeping the freezing wind at bay. The fabric had seen better days. There were loose threads at the cuffs and a small tear near the left shoulder that she'd tried to mend with whatever she could find. Maya had been working double shifts at a local diner for months, scraping together just enough to cover rent and groceries. Her hands were raw from washing dishes in scalding water for hours on end, and her feet ached in shoes that were 2 sizes too big, hand-me-downs from her older sister who'd moved away years ago. Tonight, she clutched her last $20, money she'd been saving for tomorrow's lunch and maybe a coffee to get through another grueling shift. Her stomach had been growling for hours, a constant reminder of the meal she'd skipped earlier to save money. But she'd learned to ignore hunger. It was just another part of her reality, another challenge she faced with the same quiet strength that had carried her through losing her parents and living paycheck to paycheck. That's when she saw him huddled on a park bench like a forgotten shadow. There was a man who seemed to be losing his battle against the merciless cold. The bench was covered in a thin layer of frost, and she could see ice crystals forming on the metal armrests. His clothes were raggedy, mismatched layers that clearly weren't doing their job. A thin hoodie over what looked like a torn t-shirt, pants with holes in the knees, and shoes that were falling apart at the seams. He was shivering so violently that Maya could see it from across the street. His whole body seemed to be vibrating with the cold, and every few seconds he'd curl deeper into himself, trying desperately to find warmth that simply wasn't there. His hands were tucked deep into his armpits, but she could still see them shaking. There was something heartbreaking about the way he kept shifting position, searching for comfort on that unforgiving bench. Now, here's where most people would have felt that familiar tug of sympathy, maybe even reached for their wallet, but then found a dozen excuses to keep walking. He might spend it on drugs. I've got my own problems. Someone else will help him. What if he's dangerous? But Maya, she didn't think twice. She crossed the street with purpose, her heart racing not from the cold, but from something deeper. a recognition that she was looking at another human being who needed help more than she needed that $20 bill. As she approached, she could hear his labored breathing, see the way his shoulders hunched against the wind that seemed to cut right through whatever protection his clothes might have once offered. "Hey," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "Sir?" The man's eyes opened slowly, and Maya was struck by something completely unexpected. Despite his rough appearance and desperate circumstances, there was an intensity in his gaze that didn't match his situation at all. His eyes weren't clouded by substances or defeated by life's hardships. They were sharp, observant, almost calculating. There was intelligence there and something else she couldn't quite place. It was as if he was seeing everything, processing everything, filing away details for some purpose she couldn't understand. But Maya didn't dwell on it. All she saw was someone who needed help, someone who was suffering in a way she understood all too well. She'd been cold and hungry plenty of times herself. "I know this isn't much," she said, pulling the crumpled 20 from her pocket. The bill was warm from being pressed against her body, and she could see his eyes widen slightly as she extended it toward him. "But maybe it'll help you get somewhere warm tonight. Or at least grab something hot to eat." She placed the money in his trembling hands, and the moment their skin touched, she felt how ice-cold his fingers were. It was like touching marble that had been left outside all winter. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She unwound the only scarf she owned, a simple knitted thing her grandmother had made years ago in soft blue yarn. It wasn't expensive or fancy, but it was warm, and it carried memories of love and care. "Here," she said, gently wrapping it around his neck. "This should help a little." The man stared at her with those penetrating eyes, and for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Neither of them spoke. Maya could feel him studying her face as if he was trying to memorize every detail, trying to understand something about her that went deeper than this simple act of kindness. His gaze was so intense it almost made her uncomfortable, but there was nothing threatening about it, just curiosity and something that looked almost like wonder. "You don't have to do this," he said finally, his voice hoarse but somehow refined. There was something about his tone that didn't quite fit his appearance, an eloquence that seemed out of place with his circumstances. But Maya attributed it to the cold affecting his speech, or maybe he was someone who'd fallen on hard times recently. "I know I don't have to," she replied with that genuine smile that had gotten her through her darkest days. "But I want to. We all need help sometimes, right?" The man nodded slowly, still studying her face. "Thank you," he said. And there was something in those two words that carried more weight than Maya could understand. "Stay warm," she replied, before turning to walk away. She didn't look back, didn't expect gratitude or recognition. That's just who Maya was, someone who helped because it was the right thing to do, not because she wanted anything in return. Her grandmother had taught her that kindness was its own reward, and Maya had never forgotten that lesson. What Maya didn't know was that the man on the bench was watching her every step until she disappeared around the corner, his eyes tracking her movement with an intensity that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with fascination. And what she definitely couldn't have imagined was who he really was. The moment Maya was out of sight, the man slowly stood up, straightening his posture in a way that seemed to transform him entirely. The hunched, defeated stance melted away, replaced by something commanding and confident. He pulled out an expensive smartphone, the kind that definitely didn't belong with his shabby clothes, and made a call. "It's done," he said quietly into the phone, his voice now carrying an authority that would be recognized in boardrooms across the country. "I found her." His name was Elias Vance, and he wasn't a homeless man at all. He was one of the wealthiest people in the city, worth billions, and known throughout the business world for his ruthless efficiency and cold decision-making. His companies had shaped skylines and influenced economies. But tonight he'd been conducting what he called a test of humanity, disguising himself as someone in need, to see how people would really react when they thought no one was watching. He'd been sitting on that bench for over 3 hours, enduring the bitter cold as part of his experiment. The discomfort had been worth it for the data he was collecting. Dozens of people had walked by, some avoiding eye contact entirely, others glancing his way with pity but keeping their distance. A few had even crossed the street to avoid him altogether. One woman had thrown loose change at his feet without stopping. A group of teenagers had laughed and made cruel comments. But Maya had been different. She hadn't just given him money, she'd given him everything she had, including something personal and meaningful. As he walked toward his luxury car parked several blocks away, far enough that no one would connect the homeless man to the billionaire, Elias found himself thinking about Maya in a way that surprised him completely. Her kindness wasn't performed or calculated. It wasn't done for social media attention or tax benefits or to feel better about herself. It was simply human decency in its rawest form, and it had shaken him more than any business deal ever could. What struck him most was the realization that Maya had looked at him and seen a person worth helping, even when he appeared to have nothing to offer in return. In his world of corporate politics and endless networking, people were constantly trying to get something from him, to use his wealth and influence for their own gain. But Maya had given without expecting anything back, without even knowing if he deserved it. That night, as Elias sat in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He was going to find out more about this woman who'd restored his faith in human nature with a simple act of kindness, and he had the perfect plan to do it. But little did he know that bringing Maya into his world would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, happiness, and what really mattered in life. The test was over, but the real experiment was just beginning. The next morning arrived with that cruel irony that life seems to specialize in. Maya woke up in her tiny studio apartment, stomach growling louder than her ancient alarm clock. The reality of giving away her last $20 hit her like a slap in the face when she opened her empty refrigerator. But here's the thing about Maya. She didn't regret it. Not even for a second. She was getting ready for another grueling shift at the diner, mentally preparing herself for another day of rude customers and aching feet, when something completely unexpected happened. Her phone rang, and it wasn't a number she recognized. "Is this Maya Chen?" The voice on the other end was professional, almost intimidatingly so. "Yes, this is Maya," she replied, already suspicious. In her experience, unexpected phone calls usually meant bad news. Overdue bills, collection agencies, or some scam trying to take advantage of people like her. "My name is Sarah Matthews, and I'm calling from Vance Industries. We'd like to schedule an interview with you for a position that's opened up in our company. Would you be available this afternoon?" Maya nearly dropped the phone. Vance Industries? She'd heard the name, of course, everyone in the city had. It was one of those massive corporations with gleaming skyscrapers and influence that reached into every corner of business and politics. But Maya had never applied there. She'd never even dreamed of applying there. Companies like that didn't hire people like her. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake," Maya said, her voice shaking slightly. "I never applied to your company. I work at Murphy's Diner downtown, and I don't have the kind of qualifications you'd be looking for." "There's no mistake, Miss Chen. We've been observing your character, and we believe you'd be perfect for this position. The salary starts at $75,000 a year, with full benefits and opportunities for advancement." Maya had to sit down. $75,000? That was more money than she'd ever imagined making. It was more than her parents had ever made combined. For someone who'd been living paycheck to paycheck, scraping together $20 for lunch, this felt like winning the lottery. I don't understand. How do you even know who I am?" "All will be explained during the interview, Miss Chen. Can you be here at 2 o'clock today?" "The address is 1250 Madison Avenue, 52nd floor." Maya looked around her cramped apartment, at the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter, at the clothes she'd been wearing for 3 days straight, because she couldn't afford to do laundry. Whatever this was, mistake, miracle, or something in between, she couldn't afford to pass it up. "I'll be there," she said, though her voice barely came out as a whisper. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Maya spent her last few dollars on dry cleaning her only decent outfit, a simple black dress she'd bought at a thrift store for job interviews. She practiced walking in her uncomfortable heels, rehearsed answers to questions she thought they might ask, and tried to calm her racing heart. When Maya stepped into the Vance Industries building that afternoon, she felt like she'd entered another universe. The lobby was all marble and glass with ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into infinity. People in expensive suits moved through the space like they belonged there, like they'd been born to inhabit places of such obvious wealth and power. The elevator ride to the 52nd floor felt eternal. Maya watched the numbers climb higher and higher, each floor representing a level of success she'd never imagined reaching. By the time the doors opened, her hands were sweating despite the air conditioning. Sarah Matthews turned out to be exactly what Maya expected. Impeccably dressed, perfectly professional, with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to worry about money. She led Maya through a maze of corridors lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Maya's annual rent. "The CEO will see you personally," Sarah explained as they walked. "This is highly unusual, but Mr. Vance specifically requested to conduct this interview himself." They stopped in front of massive oak doors that looked like they belonged in a palace rather than an office building. Sarah knocked twice, waited for a response, then gestured for Maya to enter. "Mr. Vance, Miss Chen is here for her interview." Maya stepped into the office and froze. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she wondered if she was losing her mind. Behind an enormous desk that probably cost more than her car, sat a man in an expensive tailored suit. His hair was perfectly styled, his posture commanding, and his entire presence radiated the kind of authority that moved mountains and shaped economies. But Maya recognized those eyes immediately. It was him. The homeless man from the park bench. The man she'd given her last $20 to. The man she'd wrapped her grandmother's scarf around. "Hello, Maya," Elias Vance said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his position and power. "Please have a seat." Maya stood there, mouth open, trying to process what she was seeing. The transformation was so complete it seemed impossible. Gone was the shivering, desperate man from the bench. In his place sat someone who clearly controlled more wealth and influence than most people could comprehend. You're him," she finally managed to say. "From last night. On the bench." "I am." Elias leaned back in his chair, studying her reaction with the same intensity she'd noticed the night before. But now, in this context, that intensity felt different, more calculating, more purposeful. "And you're probably wondering what's going on." Maya sank into the leather chair across from his desk, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "I don't understand." "Why were you? I mean, if you're..." She gestured around the opulent office, unable to finish the sentence. "If I'm one of the wealthiest men in the city, what was I doing pretending to be homeless?" Elias finished for her. "It's a fair question, and you deserve an honest answer." He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city below. From this height, people looked like ants, cars like toys, and the problems of ordinary life seemed very far away indeed. "I call it a humanity test," he said without turning around. "I disguise myself as someone in need and observe how people react when they think no one's watching. When there's no social media to capture their good deeds, no tax benefits to claim, no recognition to gain." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "A test? I've been doing it for months in different locations around the city. Do you know how many people walked past me last night? 43. Do you know how many stopped to help? 1. He turned back to face her, and Maya saw something in his expression that she couldn't quite read. "You." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Maya's mind was racing, trying to process the implications of what he was telling her. "So my kindness was an experiment to you?" "At first, yes," Elias admitted, returning to his chair. "But what happened next surprised me. Your gesture wasn't just kind, it was selfless in a way I'd almost forgotten existed. You gave me everything you had, including something with obvious sentimental value, to help someone you'd never met and would never see again." Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks. "And now you want to what? Reward me for passing your test?" "I want to offer you a job as my personal assistant," Elias said, his tone becoming more businesslike. "The position comes with excellent compensation, opportunities for growth, and the chance to work at the highest levels of corporate leadership." "Because I gave you $20? "Because you showed me something I'd been looking for without even knowing it." Elias leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Maya, I need someone around me who sees people as human beings first, not as transactions or opportunities. Someone with your vision." Maya stared at him, trying to understand what was really happening here. Part of her wanted to be angry about the deception, about being studied like a lab rat, but another part of her couldn't ignore the opportunity sitting in front of her, the chance to escape the cycle of poverty that had defined her entire life. "What exactly would this job involve?" she asked carefully, You'd work directly with me on various projects, help me understand perspectives I might otherwise miss, provide input on decisions that affect thousands of people. Elias paused. And help me figure out how to use my resources to actually make a difference instead of just accumulating more wealth. There was something in his voice when he said that last part that made Maya look at him more closely. Beneath the expensive suit and commanding presence, she caught a glimpse of something unexpected. Loneliness, maybe, or a kind of emptiness that all the money in the world couldn't fill. I need time to think about this, Maya said finally. Of course, but Maya? Elias reached into his desk drawer and pulled out something that made her heart skip a beat. It was her grandmother's scarf, the blue knitted one she'd wrapped around his neck the night before. I wanted to return this to you, but I also wanted you to know that it stayed with me all night. It reminded me that there are still people in this world who give, without expecting anything in return. Maya took the scarf, and as her fingers touched the familiar yarn, she realized that whatever happened next, her life had just changed forever. The question was whether that change would be the miracle she'd been hoping for, or something far more complicated than she could possibly imagine. As she prepared to leave his office, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that accepting this job would mean entering a world where nothing was quite what it seemed, where even kindness could be a test, and where the line between genuine connection and calculated manipulation might be harder to see than she'd ever expected. Maya accepted the job, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the desperate need to escape her financial struggles, or maybe it was curiosity about this enigmatic man who'd turned her world upside down in less than 24 hours. Whatever the reason, she found herself walking into the Vance Industries building the following Monday morning, carrying a cheap briefcase she'd bought at a discount store and wearing the same black dress she'd worn to the interview. The transition was jarring, to put it mildly. One day she was serving coffee and scrambled eggs to truck drivers and construction workers, and the next she was sitting in boardroom meetings, where single decisions involved more money than entire small towns would see in a decade. Maya's desk was positioned right outside Elias's office, a strategic placement that meant she could observe his daily routine while he could keep tabs on her. It was like being placed in the eye of a hurricane. From her vantage point, she watched Elias navigate his empire with a precision that was both impressive and slightly terrifying. The man was a machine. He arrived every morning at exactly 7:30, reviewed reports while drinking black coffee that probably cost more per cup than Maya used to make in an hour, and proceeded to make decisions that affected thousands of employees across dozens of companies. His conversations were clipped, efficient, and devoid of small talk. When he spoke to his executives, it was in numbers and projections and quarterly targets. But here's what made Maya's stomach twist. She could see the toll it was taking on him. Every interaction was transactional. Every relationship was measured in terms of profit and loss. Elias moved through his day surrounded by people who wanted something from him, who smiled and agreed with everything he said, not because they believed in it, but because their paychecks depended on keeping him happy. "Your 11 o'clock is here," Maya would announce through the intercom, and she'd watch another parade of executives file into his office with charts and presentations, all designed to extract approval for projects that would make rich people richer. The daily encounters between Maya and Elias were electric with tension, though neither of them wanted to admit it. During their first week working together, every conversation felt like they were dancing around something neither could quite name. "Maya, I need you to review these charity applications," Elias said one afternoon, dropping a stack of folders on her desk. "My foundation receives hundreds of requests for funding. I want your opinion on which ones are legitimate and which ones are just looking for easy money." Maya picked up the first folder and immediately felt overwhelmed. The amounts being requested were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars for projects she could barely comprehend. "Mr. Vance, I'm not sure I'm qualified to make these kinds of decisions. These are huge sums of money for causes I don't fully understand." "You're more qualified than you think," Elias replied, leaning against her desk in a way that made the small space feel even smaller. "You understand need in a way that most of the people in this building never will." "You've lived it." There it was again. That intensity in his eyes that made Maya feel like he could see straight through her carefully constructed professional facade to the scared young woman underneath who still couldn't quite believe she belonged in this world of marble floors and seven-figure decisions. But what if I'm wrong? Maya asked. What if I recommend funding for something that turns out to be a waste of money or worse, a scam? Then we'll learn from it and do better next time, Elias said simply. Maya, most of the people who advise me on charitable giving have never been poor. They've never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. They analyze poverty from spreadsheets and demographic studies. But you've actually lived it. That perspective is worth more than all their business degrees combined. As the weeks passed, Maya began to see cracks in Elias's carefully constructed armor. She noticed how he'd pause sometimes when signing off on particularly ruthless business decisions. She saw the way his jaw tightened when his lawyers explained how they'd found legal loopholes to avoid paying higher taxes. She watched him stare out his office windows for long minutes, as if he was searching for something in the city skyline that he couldn't quite find. One evening, after most of the office had cleared out, Maya was finishing up some reports when she heard Elias's voice coming from his office. He was on a conference call with investors discussing the acquisition of a small manufacturing company. The numbers are solid, she heard him say. We can increase efficiency by 30% if we automate their production line and reduce their workforce by 60%. Maya stopped typing. 60% workforce reduction meant hundreds of people losing their jobs. People with families, mortgages, kids who needed college funds. People like she used to be. 20 minutes later, Elias emerged from his office looking drained. That acquisition in Ohio is moving forward, he announced. We should see significant returns within 18 months. What happens to the workers who get laid off? Maya asked before she could stop herself. Elias paused, his hand on his briefcase. What do you mean? The 60% workforce reduction you mentioned, that's hundreds of people, right? What happens to them? For a moment, Elias looked genuinely surprised by the question. They'll receive severance packages, of course, and we'll provide job placement services to help them find new positions. Will the severance packages be enough to cover their expenses while they look for work? And what if there aren't other manufacturing jobs in their area? What if they're too old to retrain for different careers? Elias set down his briefcase and really looked at Maya for the first time since she'd started working for him. You're thinking about them as individuals, not just numbers on a balance sheet. Aren't they individuals? Maya asked. Every one of those jobs represents a person who's probably scared right now about how they're going to pay their bills and take care of their family. Something shifted in Elias's expression. You're right, he said quietly. I've been in this business so long I sometimes forget that behind every cost-cutting measure is a human being whose life is about to change. That conversation opened a floodgate. Over the following days, Maya found herself challenging Elias in ways that clearly made him uncomfortable, but also seemed to fascinate him. When he proposed closing underperforming retail locations, she asked about the communities that depended on those stores. When he discussed raising rents on residential properties his company owned, she pointed out the families who might be forced to move away from schools and support systems they'd built their lives around. You're making this much more complicated than it needs to be, Elias said one afternoon after Maya had spent 20 minutes explaining why they shouldn't close a community center that wasn't generating enough revenue. No, Maya replied, surprising herself with her boldness. I'm making it as complicated as it actually is. People's lives are complicated. They can't be reduced to profit and loss statements. Elias stared at her for a long moment, and Maya was sure she'd crossed a line. She was probably about to be fired for questioning the judgment of a billionaire CEO. But instead of anger, she saw something else in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe even respect. Tell me about yourself. Maya, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Not your resume or your qualifications. Tell me about your life, Maya hesitated. In her experience, when powerful people asked personal questions, it usually meant they were looking for weaknesses to exploit. But there was something in Elias's tone that seemed genuine. There's not much to tell, she said carefully. I grew up poor, lost my parents young, been working since I was 16 to keep my head above water. That's the outline, Elias said. I want the details. What drives you? What keeps you going when everything seems hopeless? Maya looked at this man who commanded billions of dollars and influenced global markets, and realized he was asking her these questions because he genuinely didn't understand. He'd never had to worry about basic survival. never had to make impossible choices between necessities, never had to find hope in the darkest moments of financial desperation. "You really want to know?" she asked. "I do." Maya took a deep breath. "Most of my salary, probably 60% of it, goes to supporting a homeless shelter downtown. It's called Hope Harbor, and it's where I volunteer on weekends. The people there remind me that kindness matters, that we're all just a few bad breaks away from needing help ourselves." Elias leaned forward. "You're giving away most of your salary?" "The money you pay me is more than I ever dreamed of having," Maya said. "I can live comfortably on what's left over and still help people who need it more than I do. Those families at the shelter aren't there because they're lazy or irresponsible. They're there because life hit them with medical bills they couldn't afford, or job losses they couldn't control, or disasters they couldn't prevent." As Maya spoke, she watched Elias's expression change. The calculating businessman facade was melting away, replaced by something more vulnerable and uncertain. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked like he didn't have all the answers. "You're giving me a different perspective on wealth and responsibility," he admitted. "In my world, success is measured by how much you accumulate. In your world, it seems like success is measured by how much you can give away." "Not give away," Maya corrected. "Share. There's a difference." That evening, as Maya prepared to leave the office, she noticed Elias was still at his desk, staring at files that remained unopened. There was something different about his posture, less confident, more thoughtful. She realized that their conversations weren't just changing how she saw his world. They were changing how he saw it too. And somewhere in that realization, Maya felt something she hadn't expected. A genuine attraction to the man behind the billionaire facade. Not to his wealth or power, but to the person who was questioning everything he'd built in search of something more meaningful. But as she walked out into the night air, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing with fire. Getting emotionally involved with Elias Vance would complicate everything, and she wasn't sure either of them was ready for the kind of transformation that might require. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of growing attraction and careful boundaries. Maya found herself looking forward to their daily interactions in ways that made her uncomfortable. There was something magnetic about watching Elias grapple with concepts that challenged everything he'd built his empire on. But she also kept a careful distance because trusting a billionaire, especially one who'd started their relationship with deception, felt like setting herself up for heartbreak. Elias, meanwhile, seemed to be fighting his own internal battle. Maya would catch him watching her during meetings, studying her reactions to business decisions with an intensity that had nothing to do with professional development. When she'd suggest alternative approaches to problems, approaches that prioritized people over profit margins, he'd listen with a focus that bordered on fascination. "You're suspicious of me," Elias said one afternoon, appearing at Maya's desk after a particularly tense board meeting. "I can see it in your eyes every time I offer you opportunities that seem too good to be true." Maya looked up from the charity applications she was reviewing. "Can you blame me? 3 months ago, I was making minimum wage plus tips. Now you're paying me more money than I've ever seen, and asking for my opinion on decisions worth millions of dollars. It feels—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Unreal. What if I told you there was more to the story?" Elias asked, settling into the chair beside her desk. "What if the test on the park bench wasn't just about finding someone with integrity?" Maya set down her pen and gave him her full attention. "I'm listening." Elias was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city below. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability Maya had never heard before. "I wasn't born into wealth. Maya, I know that might be hard to believe, given how I live now, but it's true." He turned to face her, and she saw something raw in his expression. "I grew up in the same kind of poverty you did. Maybe worse." Maya felt something shift inside her chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know what it's like to wear shoes with holes in them to school and pretend it's a fashion choice. I know what it's like to do homework by candlelight because the electricity got shut off. I know what it's like to watch your mother cry over bills she can't pay while she works 3 jobs just to keep a roof over your head." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge Maya hadn't known existed. "How did you get from there to here?" Elias gestured around his luxurious office. Scholarships, student loans, and a kind of ruthless determination that probably wasn't entirely healthy. "I was so terrified of being poor again, that I became obsessed with accumulating wealth and power. The problem is, once you start down that path, it's easy to forget where you came from. Maya studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but all she saw was honesty. So the test was my way of trying to find people who still had what I'd lost, Elias admitted. I've been rich for so long that I've forgotten how to recognize genuine kindness versus strategic networking. Everyone in my world wants something from me, and they're all willing to perform whatever version of themselves they think will get it. But you thought I was different because I helped a stranger? I thought you were different because you helped a stranger who couldn't do anything for you in return. Or at least who you thought couldn't do anything for you in return. Elias leaned forward. Maya, do you know how many charity organizations approach me every month asking for funding? Hundreds. Thousands. And do you know what the vast majority of them have in common? They're run by people who've never experienced the problems they claim to want to solve. They write beautiful grant applications about helping the homeless, but they've never spent a night wondering where they were going to sleep. They create programs to fight hunger, but they've never had to choose between buying groceries and paying rent. Maya was beginning to understand where this was going. You wanted to find someone who'd lived it. Exactly. Someone who would know the difference between programs that actually help people and programs that just make rich donors feel good about themselves. Elias paused. Someone who would help me figure out how to use my resources to make a real difference instead of just writing checks that disappear into administrative overhead. And you think I'm that person? I know you are. Maya, you're giving away 60% of your salary to a homeless shelter. You're not doing it for tax breaks or social recognition or to network with other philanthropists. You're doing it because you understand on a cellular level what it means to need help. Maya felt tears threatening to spill over. You have no idea how terrifying this is for me. What do you mean? This world, this job, this level of responsibility, it's overwhelming. Every day I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. Like I'm going to be found out as a fraud who doesn't belong in boardrooms and charity galas. Maya's voice broke slightly. And now you're telling me you want me to help you redistribute millions of dollars? What if I mess it up? What if I choose the wrong programs or trust the wrong people? Elias reached across the space between them and covered her hand with his. The gesture was simple, but it sent electricity up Maya's arm. Maya, you can't mess this up worse than I already have. What do you mean? I mean, I've been throwing money at problems for years without really understanding them. I've funded programs that looked good on paper but didn't actually help anyone. I've given grants to organizations that spent more on galas than on the people they claimed to serve. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. I need your perspective because mine is skewed by privilege. I've had for so long I forgot it wasn't normal. Maya looked down at their joined hands and felt something dangerous blooming in her chest, not just attraction, but genuine affection for this complicated man who was trying to figure out how to use his power for good. What are you proposing? She asked. A partnership. Not just employer and employee, but genuine collaboration on something that matters. Elias's eyes were bright with possibility. Instead of my foundation operating like every other wealthy person's tax write-off, what if we created something different? Something that actually addresses root causes instead of just treating symptoms? Like what? Tell me about Hope Harbor, Elias said. The shelter where you volunteer. What do they need that money can't solve? Maya thought about the families she'd met, the stories she'd heard, the problems that went deeper than just needing a place to sleep. Stability. Most of the people there aren't chronically homeless. They're families who hit a rough patch and need time to get back on their feet. But the current system treats homelessness like an emergency to be managed instead of a problem to be solved. What would solving it look like? Comprehensive support. Not just beds and meals, but job training, childcare, mental health services, help finding permanent housing, financial literacy programs. Maya was getting excited now, her voice gaining strength. Most people just need a bridge between crisis and stability, but that bridge has to be long enough and strong enough to actually work. Elias was nodding, his business mind clearly engaged. What if we started there? What if we used Hope Harbor as a pilot program for a new model of addressing homelessness, something that focuses on getting people back to self-sufficiency instead of just keeping them alive? Maya felt her heart racing. You'd do that? You'd invest in something that might take years to show results, that might not generate the kind of immediate success stories that look good in annual reports? Maya, I've spent the last 15 years generating impressive quarterly earnings. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What I don't have is a sense that any of it matters." Elias squeezed her hand. "But working with you, seeing problems through your eyes, it's the first time in years that I've felt like what I'm doing might actually make a difference." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and something deeper that neither of them wanted to name. Maya realized that somewhere in their daily conversations and shared frustrations, her wariness of Elias had transformed into something much more complicated. "This could change everything," she said quietly. "I'm counting on it," Elias replied. As they sat there, planning a future that would merge his resources with her understanding, Maya felt like she was standing at the edge of something enormous, not just a professional partnership, but a chance to take everything painful about her past and transform it into something that could help others. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that getting this close to Elias Vance, emotionally, professionally, personally, was about to complicate her life in ways she couldn't possibly anticipate. Because what they were talking about wasn't just charity work. It was a shared mission that would require trust, vulnerability, and a level of collaboration that would blur every line she'd carefully drawn between them. And as Maya looked into Elias's eyes, seeing excitement and determination in something that looked dangerously like affection, she realized that maybe she was ready for that kind of complication after all. For 3 months, Maya and Elias had been building something beautiful together. Their partnership on the Hope Harbor project was gaining momentum, and their personal relationship had evolved into something that felt both professional and deeply intimate. Maya found herself staying late at the office not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Their conversations about social impact had become the highlight of her days, and she'd begun to see glimpses of the man Elias could be when he wasn't hiding behind corporate armor. But the past has a way of catching up with you, especially when you're someone as powerful as Elias Vance. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning that changed everything. Maya was reviewing applications for their pilot program expansion when she heard Elias's voice rise from behind his office door. Not the controlled, measured tone he used in business meetings, but something sharper, more desperate. "Marcus, you can't be serious about this. That was months ago and it has nothing to do with our current operations." Maya tried not to listen, but the walls were thin, and Elias's voice was carrying. She heard fragments, media attention, reputation damage, private matter, but couldn't piece together the full picture. What she could tell was that whatever this call was about, it was making Elias sound more rattled than she'd ever heard him. 20 minutes later, Elias emerged from his office looking like he'd aged 10 years. His usually perfect hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, and there was a tension in his shoulders that Maya had never seen before. "Everything okay?" she asked, though it clearly wasn't. "Fine," Elias said tersely, then caught himself. "Sorry, no, it's not fine. But it's nothing you need to worry about." Maya felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. In her experience, when powerful people said, "Don't worry about it," it usually meant you should start worrying immediately. The next morning brought her answer in the worst possible way. Maya was getting coffee in the break room when she overheard 2 executives talking in hushed, excited tones by the window. "Did you see the morning business report?" one of them was saying. "They're running a feature on Elias and that whole homeless guy stunt he pulled." Maya's blood went cold. "I heard Marcus Thornfield leaked it," the other executive replied. "Makes sense. He's been trying to discredit Elias ever since the Meridian acquisition fell through. This is his revenge." "Billionaire CEO's cruel social experiment exposed," the first one read from his phone. "Elias Vance disguised himself as homeless man to test public's compassion. They're calling it manipulative and ethically questionable." Maya set down her coffee cup with shaking hands and walked quickly back to her desk. Her mind was racing, trying to process what she'd just heard. The test, the night she'd met Elias on that park bench, was being splashed across the business news as some kind of calculated publicity stunt. She grabbed her phone and searched for the article, and what she found made her stomach drop to her feet. The headline was worse than what she'd overheard. "Billionaire's Homeless Hoax. Vance Industries CEO deceived public in cynical humanity test." Below it was a photo of Elias in his expensive suit next to a grainy security camera image of him on the park bench that night, looking vulnerable and cold, Maya read the article with growing horror. Marcus Thornfield, a business rival who'd apparently lost a major deal to Elias earlier in the year, had somehow learned about the humanity tests and leaked the story to every major business publication simultaneously. The article painted Elias as a manipulative sociopath who'd exploited people's compassion for his own entertainment. But the worst part was what came next. There in the middle of the article was Maya's name. Sources close to Vance Industries confirmed that the CEO hired Maya Chen, the woman who helped him during his deception, as his personal assistant shortly after the incident. Chen, who was working as a diner waitress at the time, was reportedly offered a position with a starting salary of $75,000, leading to speculation about whether this was truly charity or part of an elaborate publicity scheme. Maya's hands were shaking so badly, she could barely hold her phone. The article made it sound like her job, their partnership, everything they'd built together was just an extension of Elias's manipulation. It implied that she was either complicit in the deception or so naive that she'd been used without even knowing it. Her phone started buzzing with notifications, friends, and former co-workers who'd seen the article, reporters requesting comments, strangers on social media dissecting every detail of her life. In the span of 20 minutes, Maya had gone from being a private person to being a central figure in a scandal she'd never asked to be part of. Elias appeared at her desk, his face grim. "Maya, I need you to know that I had nothing to do with this leak. Marcus Thornfield is trying to—" "Is it true?" Maya interrupted, looking up at him with tears in her eyes. "Did you hire me as some kind of publicity stunt?" "Of course not. You know that's not, do I?" Maya's voice was rising and she could feel other employees turning to stare. "Because according to this article, I'm either your accomplice or your victim. And honestly, Elias, I'm not sure which one is worse." "Maya, please. Let's discuss this privately." But Maya was already standing, grabbing her purse and the few personal items she kept at her desk. "You know what the really sick part is? I actually started to believe that you cared about making a difference. I thought our work together meant something." "It does mean something," Elias said desperately. "Maya, everything we've built together is real. The foundation, the shelter project, our what?" Maya challenged. "Our friendship? Our partnership? How am I supposed to know what's real when it all started with a lie?" The office had gone completely quiet. Everyone was pretending to work while obviously listening to every word of their confrontation. Maya realized that staying here, fighting with Elias in front of his employees, was only going to make the media circus worse. "I can't do this," she said quietly. "I can't be part of this world where even kindness is strategic, and every gesture has an ulterior motive." Maya walked toward the elevator, and Elias followed her. "Maya, wait. Please don't let Marcus Thornfield destroy what we've built. He's doing this to hurt me, not you." "But I'm the one getting hurt," Maya said, jabbing the elevator button repeatedly. "Do you understand what this means for me? I went from being nobody to being a headline in every business publication in the country. People are questioning whether I earned this job or whether I'm just some naive girl you manipulated." The elevator doors opened, and Maya stepped inside. As they began to close, she reached into her purse and pulled out something that made Elias's face go pale. The blue scarf she'd given him that first night, the one he'd returned to her months ago. "You gave this back to me," she said, holding it out to him, "but I think you should keep it. Consider it a reminder that kindness isn't supposed to be a test." She dropped the scarf at his feet as the elevator doors closed, leaving Elias standing alone in the hallway with the physical reminder of the night that had started everything. Maya spent the rest of that day fielding phone calls from reporters, deleting social media accounts, and trying to figure out how to disappear from a story that seemed to be growing bigger by the hour. By evening, she'd made her decision. She was done with Elias Vance's world. Maya spent her savings on a month's rent for a tiny studio apartment across town, far from the gleaming corporate towers and society galas that had briefly been her life. She went back to working multiple jobs, not because she needed the money, but because she needed the anonymity. She picked up shifts at different diners and coffee shops, places where nobody knew her name or cared about her connection to a billionaire's scandal. But most importantly, she threw herself into volunteer work at Hope Harbor with an intensity that bordered on desperation. If she couldn't trust Elias's version of philanthropy, she'd create her own. She started organizing donation drives, coordinating with other local shelters, and developing programs that didn't depend on wealthy benefactors who might have hidden agendas. The families at Hope Harbor welcomed her back without question. They didn't care about business scandals or media coverage. They cared that Maya understood their struggles and was willing to help without judgment or conditions. "You look tired." "Honey," Mrs. Rodriguez said one evening as Maya served dinner at the shelter. Mrs. Rodriguez had been staying there with her 3 kids for 2 months while she saved money for an apartment deposit. "You've been working yourself pretty hard lately." "I'm fine," Maya replied, though she knew it wasn't true. She was exhausted, heartbroken, and angry in ways she was still trying to understand. "You know," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, "sometimes when we're hurting, we think the answer is to work so hard we don't have time to feel the pain. But the pain doesn't go anywhere. It just waits for us to slow down." Maya felt tears threatening again. What if the pain is telling me something important? What if it's telling me I was stupid to trust someone who spent his whole life playing games with people's lives? "Maybe," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Or maybe it's telling you that you opened your heart to someone. And that takes courage even when it doesn't work out the way we hoped." That night, Maya sat in her small apartment, scrolling through news articles about the scandal. The story had legs. Every day brought new analysis pieces about the ethics of Elias's humanity tests, speculation about Maya's role in the situation, and commentary on what it said about inequality and privilege in America. She saw that Elias had held a press conference, attempting damage control. He'd apologized for the deception and announced that he was stepping back from day-to-day operations at Vance Industries to focus on philanthropy. But Maya could see in his face during the televised apology that the confident, commanding man she'd known was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely lost. Part of her felt sorry for him, but a bigger part of her felt relieved to be away from a world where even genuine connection could be tainted by publicity considerations and strategic thinking. Maya turned off her laptop and looked around her tiny apartment, so different from the luxury she'd briefly experienced but somehow more honest. She'd made her choice. She'd chosen authenticity over opportunity, simplicity over status, and her own values over the seductive pull of power and wealth. But as she drifted off to sleep that night, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't over, that somewhere across the city, Elias was probably awake too, trying to figure out how to bridge the gap that had opened between them. And despite everything that had happened, despite all the reasons she had to stay away, Maya wasn't entirely sure she wanted him to stop trying. For 2 months, Maya had managed to convince herself that she was better off without Elias Vance in her life. She'd found a rhythm in her new reality, working at local coffee shops during the day, volunteering at Hope Harbor in the evenings, and spending her weekends organizing community support programs that didn't depend on wealthy donors with complicated motives. But healing isn't linear, and moving on isn't always as simple as changing your address and your routine. Maya still found herself thinking about Elias at unexpected moments. When she saw news coverage of corporate decisions that prioritized profit over people, she wondered if he would have made the same choices. When she worked with families at the shelter who needed exactly the kind of comprehensive support they'd planned together, she felt the sting of what could have been. She told herself these were just remnants of disappointment, echoes of a professional relationship that had ended badly. She definitely wasn't missing the man himself. The way his eyes lit up when they discussed solutions to complex problems, or the vulnerability he'd shown when talking about his childhood, or the electricity she'd felt when he'd taken her hand that day in the office, definitely. Not Maya was restocking supplies. In the Hope Harbor kitchen on a rainy Thursday evening when Mrs. Rodriguez found her arranging canned goods with unnecessary precision. "Maya, honey, there's someone here to see you," she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise that made Maya look up. "If it's another reporter, tell them I'm not interested," Maya replied without turning around. "I've said everything I'm going to say about the Vance Industries situation." "It's not a reporter," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, "and I don't think he's here about any scandal." Something in her tone made Maya turn around. Through the kitchen serving window, she could see into the main dining area where volunteers were serving dinner to the evening's guests. But what she saw there made her heart stop completely. Elias Vance was standing near the volunteer sign-in table, but he didn't look anything like the commanding CEO she'd worked for. Gone was the expensive suit, the perfect hair, the aura of untouchable power. Instead, he was wearing simple jeans and a plain sweater, and his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it. More importantly, he wasn't standing around observing or making grand gestures. He was rolling up his sleeves and asking where he could help. Maya watched through the window as Maria Santos, Hope Harbor's director, pointed Elias toward the kitchen prep area. He nodded and headed in that direction, which meant he was walking directly toward Maya. She panicked. Maya ducked behind the industrial refrigerator, her heart racing like she was hiding from some kind of dangerous predator, instead of a man she'd once considered a friend. She could hear his footsteps approaching, could hear Maria explaining the evening routine to him. "We serve about 200 people on weeknights," Maria was saying. "The cooking is mostly done, but we always need help with food prep for tomorrow, cleaning and serving. Are you comfortable working in a kitchen environment?" "I've never done anything like this before," Elias replied, and Maya could hear something different in his voice. Humility, maybe, or uncertainty. "But I'm willing to learn." Maya peeked around the refrigerator and watched as Maria handed Elias an apron and pointed him toward a pile of potatoes that needed peeling. She expected him to hesitate, to look around for an escape route, to remember that he was a billionaire who didn't need to be doing manual labor in a homeless shelter kitchen. Instead, he tied on the apron and got to work. For the next hour, Maya managed to avoid direct contact with Elias while secretly observing his every move. She watched him peel potatoes with the focused concentration of someone learning a completely new skill. She saw him listen carefully when other volunteers explained procedures, ask questions when he wasn't sure about something, and gradually relax into the rhythm of kitchen work. What surprised her most was how naturally he seemed to fit in. When Mr. Johnson, one of the shelter's regular guests, struck up a conversation while Elias was chopping vegetables, Maya expected awkwardness or condescension. Instead, she watched Elias listen with genuine attention as Mr. Johnson explained how he'd ended up at the shelter after losing his job and apartment following a heart attack. "The thing is," Mr. Johnson was saying, "most people look at us like we're different from them, like we made some choice to be here. But I worked for 30 years, paid my taxes, did everything right. Sometimes life just hits you harder than you can handle." "You're right," Elias replied quietly. "I think I used to be one of those people who assumed homelessness was always about personal choices. I'm learning how wrong I was." Maya felt something crack open in her chest. This wasn't the calculated charm she'd seen Elias use in business meetings. This was someone genuinely trying to understand a perspective he'd never encountered before. When dinner service began, Maya couldn't avoid him any longer. The kitchen was too small and there were too many tasks that required coordination. She was carrying a tray of soup containers to the serving line when she literally bumped into Elias near the pass-through window. "Maya," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like relief and apology and hope all wrapped together. "What are you doing here?" she asked, though she kept her voice low enough that other volunteers wouldn't overhear. "Learning," Elias said simply. "Helping, I hope. Trying to understand what you've been trying to show me all along." Maya set down her tray and really looked at him for the first time in 2 months. He looked tired, older somehow, but also more present than she'd ever seen him. The corporate armor was completely gone, replaced by something more vulnerable and authentic. "This isn't a photo opportunity," she said carefully. "There are no cameras here, no reporters to document your charitable work." "I know," Elias replied. "That's why I'm here." Before Maya could respond, Maria appeared at her elbow. "Maya, can you show Elias how to work the serving line? We're about to open the doors." For the next 2 hours, Maya found herself working alongside Elias in a way that felt both familiar and completely different from their time in the corporate world. Here, there were no power dynamics or strategic considerations, just the simple work of serving food to people who needed it. Maya watched Elias interact with Hope Harbor's guests, and what she saw challenged everything she thought she knew about him. When Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who'd been staying at the shelter for weeks, told him about losing her apartment after her husband died, Elias listened without trying to fix anything or offer solutions. When a young father explained how he was working 2 jobs but still couldn't afford childcare and rent, Elias asked thoughtful questions about the specific barriers he was facing. "You're different," Maya said during a brief lull in service. "What do you mean?" You're not trying to solve everyone's problems or turn this into a business strategy. You're just listening. Elias was quiet for a moment, ladling soup into bowls with careful precision. The scandal taught me something I should have learned a long time ago. People don't need me to fix their lives. They need me to see their humanity and respect their dignity. And what about us? Maya asked before she could stop herself. What about what happened between us? Elias set down the ladle and turned to face her fully. Maya, I've spent the last 2 months trying to figure out how to apologize to you in a way that would matter. The press conferences and public statements were for everyone else, but they weren't for you. So what is for me? This? Elias gestured around the kitchen, the shelter, the work they were doing together. I dissolved my old foundation, all of it. Started over completely. Maya stared at him. What do you mean? I mean, I created something new. The Last Dime Foundation, named after what you gave me that night. It's focused entirely on addressing root causes of homelessness and poverty, not just managing symptoms. And Maya? He paused, his eyes intense. It's not about tax breaks or social recognition or good publicity. It's about doing the work quietly and consistently because it needs to be done. Maya felt tears threatening. Elias, I'm not asking you to come back to work for me, he said quickly. I'm not asking you to forgive me or trust me or anything else. I'm just asking you to let me prove that I can be the person you saw in me before everything got complicated. Before Maya could respond, Maria's voice carried across the kitchen. Elias, can you help me move some tables in the main room? Of course, Elias called back, then looked at Maya one more time. I'll be here tomorrow night too, and the night after that, for as long as it takes. Maya watched him walk away, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to protect herself, to maintain the safe distance she'd worked so hard to create. But another part of her, the part that had always believed in second chances and the possibility of redemption, was starting to hope again. Over the following weeks, Elias became a regular presence at Hope Harbor. He showed up every evening after his corporate responsibilities were finished, traded his expensive suits for work clothes, and gradually earned the respect of both staff and guests through consistent, humble service. Maya found herself looking forward to these evenings in ways that scared and excited her. Working alongside Elias in this environment felt like discovering who he really was beneath all the wealth and power. She saw him celebrate small victories with shelter guests, saw him struggle with the complexity of systemic poverty, saw him wrestle with questions that had no easy answers. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner service, Elias approached Maya with something in his hands. I have something that belongs to you, he said, pulling out a familiar blue scarf. Maya's breath caught. You kept it? I've carried it with me every day since you left, Elias admitted. It's been a reminder that kindness doesn't have to be strategic, that some things are just good. Maya took the scarf, and as her fingers brushed his, she felt that familiar electric connection. Elias, I need you to know that what we're building here, this work we're doing together, it can't be about us. It has to be about them. She gestured toward the main room where families were settling in for the night. I know, Elias said softly, but Maya, can I tell you something? Working here, seeing poverty and homelessness through your eyes, learning what it really means to help people, it's changed me in ways I didn't know were possible. And not because I'm trying to win you back, but because you showed me what authentic service looks like. Maya looked into his eyes and saw something she'd been afraid to hope for. Genuine transformation. Not the strategic reinvention of a public figure managing a scandal, but the real evolution of a person who'd been forced to confront his own values and found them wanting. So what happens now? She asked. Elias smiled, and it was the first completely unguarded expression she'd seen from him since that night on the park bench. Now we keep working. We keep learning. We keep trying to make a difference in whatever small ways we can. He paused, looking around at the shelter that had become their unexpected common ground. And maybe, if we're both very lucky, we figure out how to build something real together. Not because of some test or strategy or calculated risk, but because we've learned that the best things in life happen when we stop trying to control them and start trusting in the possibility of genuine connection. Maya wrapped her grandmother's scarf around her neck and smiled back. I think I'd like that. As they walked out of Hope Harbor together that night, Maya realized that love, real love, wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about showing up consistently, doing the work even when it was difficult, and trusting that two people who were committed to becoming better versions of themselves might just be able to build something beautiful together. The test was over. The real relationship was just beginning. And there you have it. The story of how one woman's last dime became the foundation for something extraordinary. Maya's choice to help a stranger, even when she could barely help herself, didn't just change Elias's life. It revealed a truth that most of us spend our entire lives trying to understand. Real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios. It's measured in our willingness to see the humanity in others, especially when we have nothing to gain from it. Maya had every reason to walk past that bench. She was broke, hungry, and struggling just to survive. But she chose compassion over self-preservation, and that choice created ripples that transformed two lives and touched countless others. But here's what I want you to think about tonight. When was the last time you helped someone without expecting anything in return? When was the last time you chose kindness over convenience, generosity over self-interest? We live in a world that teaches us to look out for ourselves first, to accumulate and protect what we have. But Maya's story shows us that our greatest power lies not in what we keep, but in what we're willing to give away. So let me ask you this. What's your last dime moment going to be? What opportunity for genuine kindness are you going to choose to see instead of walking past? Because here's the truth. The universe is constantly testing our humanity, not through billionaires in disguise, but through everyday moments when we can choose between indifference and compassion. Maybe it's the homeless person you pass every day on your way to work. Maybe it's the elderly neighbor who seems lonely. Maybe it's the coworker who's struggling with problems you don't even know about. These aren't grand, life-changing moments. They're simple choices that reveal who we really are when no one's watching. Maya didn't give her last $20 because she thought it would change her life. She gave it because she recognized that someone else's need was greater than her own, and that recognition, that willingness to put someone else's humanity above her own comfort, is what real wealth looks like. The question isn't whether you have enough money to help others. The question is whether you have enough compassion to see when help is needed, because sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest transformations, not just in other people's lives, but in our own. Your next opportunity to change someone's life might be right around the corner. Will you be ready to take it? If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about kindness and what it means to truly help others, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because I've got more stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Stories that remind us that we all have the power to change the world, one act of compassion at a time. The world needs more Mayas. People who give when they have nothing left to give. Who see opportunity for kindness where others see inconvenience. Could that person be you?